What's up, fight fans? It's your boy AC from Eastwick Boxing UK. As always, Eastwick Boxing UK is in association with ThreeKingsBoxing.com. Today I want to take a look and speak about Gilberto Ramirez. He's the WBO champion. Hopefully you'd have all seen him defend his title for a third consecutive time, stopping Khabib Ahmed in Corpus Christi this past Saturday. The reason I want to talk about Ramirez so much is that for me personally, his title reign has been somewhat lackluster. To give him his credit, it was his first stoppage win in almost 4 years, and he battered Ahmed from pillar to post. But Khabib Ahmed isn't going to set the world alight, and his title reign thus far is devoid of any big name opponents. The cornermen of Khabib had to come and save him, and to be perfectly honest, Lawrence Cole had another shocker as a referee last night when it comes to his judgment in stopping a fight. But the question for me now is, where does Ramirez go from here? Let's take the positives rather than the negatives. He did stop a previously undefeated fighter coming in, but Ahmed had never fought outside of Ghana, and he'd never fought anybody of note. And he was clearly the smaller man of the two. So for me, this was an easy showcase fight for Zerdo, and not the type of win that is going to make him a bigger star. So the question for me is, where does he go from here? So 2 years ago in Las Vegas, Ramirez beats Arthur Abraham, and he widely outpoints him. Guys, I've got to be honest, for me, that win did nothing for me in imposing him as a star, because Arthur Abraham, for me, was a faded fighter, and he has been for quite some time. Abraham hides behind a guard and fights in fits and spurts, fights for 30-40 seconds a round and steals the round. We saw him do that against Paul Smith, we saw him do that against Martin Murray. These are fighters that a guy of Abraham's previous quality should have been able to dispose with relatively easily, in my opinion. So that's one thing. Obviously, he got sidelined thereafter that would keep him out of the ring for nearly a year, so that was Ramirez's momentum pretty much gone from winning his title. He comes back, he fights Max Burzak from the Ukraine, and that was a pretty forgettable affair. He then did, give his dues. He comes on and he beats Jesse Hart, and now he's got the stoppage win over Khabib Ahmed. But these aren't exactly what you would call world beaters, okay? Now, let's not take anything away from him, because the World Boxing Super Series has been going on now. I couldn't exactly tell you when, I haven't got the notes to hand, but that's pretty much removed 8 of the best super middleweights in the world. Okay, so there was no Callum Smith for him to fight, there was no George Groves for him to fight, there was no Simon Cox, there was no Chris Eubanks Jr., there was no Eric Skoglund, there was no Brandt, there was no Jurgen Bremer. These guys were, and even Neil Giardrim, the guy that Chris Eubanks Jr. beat in the third round of his quarterfinal, these guys weren't around for him to fight. So what did he have left? Well, the obvious one would be a unification fight against David Benavidez. But as you and I both know, PBC, Showtime and RM don't exactly work very well, and they rarely do business together. So that takes him out of the equation. The second obvious option was James DeGale. But James DeGale was coming off of a shoulder injury, and there was no way that he was going to go sleeping straight in with a guy like Ramirez. Unfortunately for James DeGale, he's now lost that title, and he lost that to Caleb Truax. But there's now talk of Caleb Truax rematching James DeGale immediately, so that automatically takes things off of the table. So the question is, where does he go from here? He hasn't got very long to fight or to wait for the eventual winner of the World Boxing Super Series. That fight I expected personally to be contested by Callum Smith and by George Groves. So all of a sudden, potential starts opening up for him. He could start to make bigger fights. And let's hope that Arum decides that he's going to try and do that, because a unification against a guy like Callum Smith or against George Groves or against Chris Eubank Jr. is going to be a massive fight for him. Quite where that fight takes place, I don't know. I'd expect out of 3, I would actually expect that Ramirez would probably come over here, given the fact that whoever the World Boxing Super Series winner is, even if it's Jurgen Bremer, let's not discount him. So if it's one of those 4 men, one of those 4 men is going to have the WBC Diamond and the WBA titles, and that is a much easier fight to make. But I expect that fight to be made in the UK. Callum Smith's got a massive following where he is. George Groves has got a pretty big following, and that fight could easily be in London. Each fighter hasn't got sort of the massive promotional backing, other than Callum Smith, who's got matchroom money. George Groves is promoted by Sauerland. Chris Eubank Jr. hasn't really got any sort of form of promotion himself at the moment. So actually, in actual practice, that fight could easily be taking place in America. But I would expect that one of those fights would happen. Hopefully, we'll see Ramirez in probably another defense against a top WBO 15 ranked name, whoever that might be. I mean, there's potential for him to settle the score with Jesse Hart, because I know Jesse Hart is quite keen on a rematch. There's perhaps the fight with Rohan Murdoch, who's an Australian. Clearly, Ramirez is going to feel that he's ready for anybody in the division. The question is, will he get the chance to prove it against the biggest names at super middleweight, or does he make the decision? Because let's be honest, Ramirez is a big guy, okay? He could easily make 175. There is a potential there for him to step up and fight those kind of guys. But again, he's going to run into the same kind of promotional problems, because you've got guys like Badu Jack, you've got guys like Adonis Stevenson, who are going to contest for the WBC belt, even guys like Marcus Brown. Now, again, the problem with him is he's promoted by Aaron, because these guys that I've just mentioned are all PBC guys. Right? They're all Showtime PBC. Personally, what I feel is that being promoted by Bob Arum is going to hold him back unless he can get one of the fights against the eventual World Boxing Super Series winner. Or if not, talk to Kalle Sauerland. And if Groves does lose, Groves could possibly take on that shot. Any of the losers that have come in, barring Skoglund, would probably fancy a chance. Whether they fancy the chances of winning or not, but it's the option of the WBO belt. That's about all for me. This has pretty much been a fucking rambling. Sorry if it sounds confusing. As always, I like your opinions. Hit me up, East at Boxing UK, or you can get to me on Aaron at 3kingsboxing.com. Thanks for listening, guys.